Fletcher Knox had inherited many things from his uncle: debts, disappointments, and a ranch that hadn't seen life in over 2 years. But he hadn't expected to inherit someone else's desperate secret. The woman standing in his kitchen wore a torn dress that had once been white, her dark hair matted with dust and something that looked suspiciously like dried blood. What disturbed him most wasn't her appearance, but the way she held the rusted kitchen knife. Not like someone defending herself, but like someone who had already decided what she was willing to sacrifice. "You're going to have sex with me," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. Fletcher dropped the saddlebag he'd been carrying, the sound echoing through the abandoned house like a gunshot. The woman didn't flinch. She stood there, barefoot on the warped wooden floor, waiting for his answer, with the patience of someone who had already lost everything that mattered. Behind her, he could see where she'd been living: makeshift bedding in the corner, empty cans arranged in careful rows, and scratch marks on the wall that formed what looked like a calendar counting days. The ranch had been empty when his uncle died. Everyone in town had confirmed it. So how long had she been here? And why did she look like she was expecting someone else to walk through that door? Fletcher raised his hands slowly, the way he might approach a wounded animal. "Miss, I think there's been some kind of mistake." Her grip tightened on the knife. "There's no mistake. You're here now, which means they'll be here soon. And when they come, they'll want to know why you kept me alive." She took a step closer, and Fletcher could see the desperation burning in her eyes. "So we do this my way, or we both end up dead." The floorboards creaked under his boots as he backed toward the door, but she matched his movement with predatory precision. Whatever had driven her to this moment, it wasn't madness. It was calculation. She had planned this conversation, rehearsed it, maybe even practiced it on previous visitors who hadn't been fortunate enough to walk away. "Who's coming?" Fletcher asked, his voice barely above a whisper. For the first time since he'd entered the house, uncertainty flickered across her face. She glanced toward the window, where late afternoon shadows were already stretching across the empty corral. "You really don't know, do you?" The knife wavered in her grasp. "Then why are you here?" Fletcher pulled the inheritance papers from his coat pocket, the legal documents that had brought him to this godforsaken place. But as he unfolded them, he noticed something that made his blood run cold. The date on the deed was wrong. Not just wrong, but impossible. According to these papers, his uncle had signed over the ranch 6 months after he died. The woman saw his expression change and smiled for the first time, but there was no warmth in it. "Now you're starting to understand. Your uncle didn't just leave you a ranch, Fletcher Knox. He left you a problem that's been growing like infection in the walls of this place." She knew his name. She'd been waiting for him specifically, and somewhere in the distance Fletcher could swear he heard the sound of approaching horses, their hoofbeats drumming against the hard-packed earth like a countdown to something he wasn't prepared to face. The hoofbeats grew louder, and Tabitha Cross moved with practiced efficiency that spoke of too many close calls. She grabbed a worn leather satchel from beneath the makeshift bedding and began stuffing it with the empty cans. Each movement was deliberate, economical, like someone who had learned that wasted motion could mean death. "How many are coming?" Fletcher asked, moving toward the window. "Don't!" Her voice cracked like a whip. "They'll see your shadow and know someone new is here. Then they'll burn this place down with both of us inside." Fletcher froze, his hand inches from the dusty curtain. The sound of horses was closer now, maybe a quarter mile out. He could distinguish at least 3 distinct sets of hoofbeats, possibly more. "Who are they?" Tabitha slung the satchel across her shoulder and moved to what appeared to be a solid wall panel. Her fingers found hidden notches in the wood, and a section swung inward, revealing a narrow space behind the kitchen. "Men who think they own everything they can take, including me." The hiding place was barely wide enough for one person, but she gestured for him to follow. Fletcher hesitated. Everything about this situation violated every instinct he'd developed in 40 years of life. The smart thing would be to walk out the front door, mount his horse, and ride away from whatever nightmare his uncle had left behind. Instead, he found himself squeezing into the cramped space behind Tabitha, close enough to smell the fear sweat on her skin and feel the tension radiating from her body like heat from a forge. She pulled the panel shut behind them, and they were plunged into absolute darkness. Through gaps in the wood, Fletcher could see slivers of the kitchen. The hoofbeats stopped directly outside the house. Leather creaked as men dismounted. Spurs jangled against wooden steps. The front door exploded inward with a crash that made the walls shudder. "Search every room," a voice commanded. The accent was foreign, maybe German or Dutch. She's been here recently. The ashes in the fireplace are still warm. Tabitha's hand found Fletcher's arm in the darkness, her grip desperate. Her lips brushed his ear as she whispered, "If they find us, tell them you were just passing through. Tell them you never saw me." Heavy boots thundered across the floor above them. Something crashed, furniture being overturned, searching. A different voice, younger and eager. "Boss, look at this. Fresh saddlebags by the door." Fletcher's heart sank. He'd dropped his gear when Tabitha had made her shocking proposition. Now it would lead these men straight to him. "Someone new is here," the foreign voice said. Satisfaction evident. "Check the barn, check the well, check every place a man might hide." A pause then, "And bring me that satchel from upstairs. The one with her things." In the darkness, Fletcher felt Tabitha stiffen. Whatever was in that satchel upstairs, it was important enough to make her risk everything. But she was here with him, which meant she'd had to leave it behind. The searching continued for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Finally, the foreign voice spoke again. "She was here, but she's gone now. Probably headed for the river crossing." The sound of boots retreating. "We'll catch her there, but first we burn this place. Make sure she has nothing to come back to." Through the gaps in the wood, Fletcher could see one of the men pouring something from a container onto the kitchen floor. The sharp smell of coal oil filled the air. In moments, this entire house would be an inferno. Tabitha was trembling now, her breath coming in short gasps. But when she spoke, her voice was steady. "When I say run, you go out the back. Don't look for me. Don't try to help me. Just run." The smell of coal oil grew stronger as more liquid splashed across the wooden floors. Fletcher could hear the men moving systematically through the house, preparing to turn it into a bonfire. But Tabitha hadn't given the signal to run yet. She remained perfectly still in the darkness, listening to something he couldn't detect. "Boss," the younger voice called from upstairs. "Found something interesting." Heavy footsteps descended the stairs. "What is it?" "Letters. Bunch of them, tied with ribbon, all addressed to someone named Catherine Cross." In the darkness, Fletcher felt Tabitha's entire body go rigid. Her breathing stopped completely. Through the gaps in the wood, he watched as the foreign man examined the letters by lamplight. The man was older than Fletcher had expected, maybe 60, with silver hair and scars across his knuckles that spoke of a lifetime of violence. "Catherine Cross," the man repeated, rolling the name around in his mouth like he was tasting wine. "So that's the name she's using now? How very touching. She kept her maiden name." He tucked the letters inside his coat. "These will be useful. Should we still burn the place?" the younger man asked. "No." The foreign man smiled, and even from their hiding spot, Fletcher could see the cruelty in it. "Leave it standing. She'll come back for these letters eventually. When she does, we'll be waiting." The men gathered their supplies and headed toward the door. But just as Fletcher began to relax, disaster struck. His boot shifted slightly in the cramped space, and his spurs scraped against the wooden panel behind them. The sound was soft, barely audible, but in the sudden silence of the house, it rang out like a bell. The footsteps stopped. "Did you hear that?" Fletcher pressed himself against Tabitha, trying to become smaller, but there was nowhere to go. The hiding space that had seemed ingenious moments before now felt like a coffin. He could hear the foreign man moving closer, his boots testing each floorboard methodically. "Sounded like metal on wood," the younger voice observed. "Maybe a rat got into something. Rats don't wear spurs." The foreign man was directly in front of their hiding spot now. Fletcher could see his shadow through the gaps. "Someone's in this house." Tabitha's hand found the knife she'd dropped when they'd hidden. Her fingers wrapped around the handle with familiar ease. Fletcher realized with cold certainty that she'd used that blade before, and not just for cutting rope or opening cans. The man's hand pressed against the wood panel, testing it. "This section sounds hollow." His voice was conversational, almost friendly. "Come out now, and I might let you keep breathing." Instead of answering, Tabitha did something Fletcher hadn't expected. She reached up and worked loose a piece of the wooden wall above their heads. Dirt and debris cascaded down as she created a small opening. Through it, Fletcher could see a sliver of sky. There was another way out, through the space between the walls and up to the roof. But climbing would make noise. More noise than a single scrape of a spur. The kind of noise that would bring all three men running with their weapons drawn. The foreign man pressed harder against the panel. Wood creaked ominously. "I'm going to count to 3. If you're not out by then, I'll put a bullet through this wall. 1. Tabitha looked at Fletcher in the dim light filtering down from above. Her eyes held a question. Trust me or die here. 2. She started climbing, her movements surprisingly graceful for someone ascending through a space barely wider than her shoulders. Fletcher followed, his heart hammering, as every small sound seemed amplified in the confined space. 3. The gunshot exploded through the kitchen, splintering wood exactly where they'd been hiding moments before. The bullet shredded through the wooden panel like paper, sending splinters flying in all directions. Fletcher hauled himself up through the narrow opening, just as another shot rang out below them. This one punched through the ceiling inches from his boots, close enough that he could feel the heat from the muzzle flash. Tabitha was already moving across the roof with the sure-footed grace of someone who'd made this escape before. The late afternoon sun had baked the wooden shingles until they were hot enough to burn through cloth, but she navigated them like stepping stones across a stream. Fletcher followed, trying to match her movements while voices shouted below. "They're on the roof! Johnson, get around back! Martinez, watch the sides!" The old shingles groaned under their combined weight. Several came loose entirely, sliding off the roof and crashing to the ground with sounds that might as well have been signal fires. Tabitha reached the far edge and peered down at the 20-foot drop to the hard-packed earth below. "There's a water barrel behind the barn," she whispered. "If we can reach it, we can break the fall." Fletcher looked where she pointed. The barrel was maybe 8 feet from the house, a jump that would require perfect timing and more luck than he'd had in years. "And if we miss? Then we die quick instead of slow." She turned to face him, and for the first time since he'd met her, he saw something besides desperation in her eyes. It was determination, mixed with what looked like gratitude. "Thank you for staying." Most men would have run. Before he could respond, she was over the edge, her body arcing through the air with arms outstretched. She hit the water barrel with a splash that sent liquid cascading in all directions, then rolled away from the impact zone just as Fletcher launched himself after her. His aim was less precise. He clipped the edge of the barrel, felt it tip and dump its contents, then crashed into the muddy ground hard enough to drive the breath from his lungs. Pain shot through his left shoulder, but nothing felt broken. Tabitha was already pulling him to his feet. "Move! They'll be coming around the corners any second." They ran toward the line of cottonwood trees that marked the beginning of the creek bed. Behind them, Fletcher could hear the men splitting up, their boots pounding across the hard ground as they tried to surround the area. A rifle cracked, and bark exploded from a tree trunk near Fletcher's head. They reached the creek and plunged into the shallow water, using the banks for cover. The current was swift enough to make footing treacherous, but it would also wash away their tracks. Tabitha led them downstream, moving with the confidence of someone who'd mapped every stone and bend. "The letters," Fletcher gasped as they half ran, half stumbled through the water. "Catherine Cross. That's your real name." She glanced back at him, her face unreadable. "Catherine's dead. Has been for 3 years. Tabitha's just trying to stay that way." "What was in those letters? What did they want with them?" "Proof," she said simply. "Proof of something that could destroy more than just me." A shout echoed from behind them. One of the men had found their trail. The pursuit was closing in, and ahead Fletcher could see where the creek opened into a wider valley. There would be no more cover, nowhere else to run. That's when Tabitha stopped dead in the water and turned to face him with an expression that made his blood run cold. "Fletcher, I need you to listen very carefully. What I'm about to tell you will change everything you think you know about your uncle." The creek water swirled around their boots as Tabitha grabbed Fletcher's arm, her grip urgent. The shouts behind them were getting closer, and somewhere in the distance, Fletcher could hear horses being mounted for a faster pursuit. "Your uncle didn't die of fever like they told everyone in town," Tabitha said, her voice barely audible over the rushing water. "Heinrich Weiss killed him, slowly, and he made me watch." Fletcher felt the world tilt sideways. Heinrich Weiss, the foreign voice, the man with the scarred knuckles who'd just tried to burn them alive. "That's impossible. Uncle Marcus died in his... That's impossible. Uncle Marcus died in his bed, the doctor confirmed it. The doctor was paid to confirm it." Tabitha pulled him deeper into the creek, where an overhanging willow provided temporary concealment. Marcus had evidence that Weiss was smuggling weapons to Indian tribes, stirring up conflict so he could sell supplies to both sides. "Your uncle was going to turn him in to the federal marshals." The sound of pursuit grew louder. Fletcher could make out individual voices now, coordinating their search pattern. But Tabitha's words hit him harder than any bullet could have. His uncle had been the most honest man he'd ever known, the kind who'd return a penny of incorrect change even if it meant a 20-mile ride to town. "How do you know all this?" Fletcher whispered. "Because I was Marcus's witness. He hired me to document Weiss's activities, dates, locations, weapons shipments. I can read and write better than most men, and I was already working in the territory as a schoolteacher." Her jaw tightened. "I was also fool enough to think that doing the right thing would protect me." A rifle shot cracked through the air, splintering a branch above their heads. One of the pursuers had spotted movement near the willow. Fletcher grabbed Tabitha's hand and they plunged deeper into the creek, using the bend to put more distance between themselves and their hunters. "The letters they found," Fletcher said as they moved. "Those were your reports?" "Some of them. Others were personal correspondence with Marcus. He was—" She paused, color rising in her cheeks despite their desperate situation. "He was courting me, properly, with intentions of marriage." The pieces began forming a terrible picture in Fletcher's mind. His uncle, a widower for 15 years, had finally found someone to care about. Someone who shared his sense of justice and his willingness to stand against corruption, and that connection had gotten them both killed. "Weiss murdered him to stop the evidence from reaching the marshals," Fletcher said. "But you escaped. Barely. Marcus hid me in the ranch when he realized Weiss was onto us, but Weiss tortured him until he revealed where I was hiding. I got away during the struggle, but Marcus," her voice broke slightly, "he died protecting me." They reached a section where the creek deepened, forcing them to wade waist-deep through the current. The cold water was a shock, but it would make tracking them much harder. Behind them, the voices had spread out, covering more ground but losing focus. "Why didn't you go to the authorities yourself?" Fletcher asked. Tabitha's laugh was bitter. "With what proof? Weiss owns half the territorial government and the other half is too scared to cross him. The only evidence that could convict him was in those letters, and now he has them back." A new sound reached them, dogs barking in the distance. Weiss had brought tracking hounds, which meant their time in the water was limited. Soon the dogs would pick up their scent again. Fletcher made a decision that surprised even him. "Then we get them back." Tabitha stopped moving and stared at him. "That's suicide. Weiss has 6 men with him. Maybe more." "Maybe. But you said it yourself. You're the only witness to what happened to Marcus. Without you, Weiss gets away with murder." Fletcher met her eyes. "And I'm not letting my uncle's killer walk free." The barking dogs were getting closer, their excited yelps echoing off the canyon walls like a promise of violence. Tabitha shook her head at Fletcher's suggestion, water dripping from her dark hair as she pressed against the creek bank. "You don't understand what you're saying. Weiss doesn't just have men. He has connections. Judges, sheriffs, territorial officials. Even if we somehow got those letters back, who would we give them to?" Fletcher had been thinking the same thing, but an idea was forming. Federal marshals operate outside territorial jurisdiction. Marcus was trying to reach them for a reason. He studied her face in the fading light. "Do you remember which marshal he planned to contact?" "Marshal Carson, out of Denver." "But Fletcher, that's over 200 miles through country that Weiss controls. We'd never make it." The sound of splashing reached them from upstream. Their pursuers had found the creek and were following it down, using the same logic that had guided Fletcher and Tabitha's escape. They had maybe 10 minutes before the net closed completely. "There's another way," Fletcher said, an idea crystallizing in his mind. "Weiss thinks he's hunting a schoolteacher and a surprised heir. He doesn't know that I've been running cattle drives for 15 years, or that I know every trail between here and Colorado." Tabitha looked at him with something that might have been hope, if hope weren't such a dangerous luxury in their situation. "Even if we could reach Denver, Weiss would follow us. He can't let either of us live now." "Then we make sure he can't follow." Fletcher grabbed her hand and pulled her toward the far bank, where a stand of thick brush offered temporary concealment. "But first, we need to double back and get those letters." "That's insane. They'll be expecting us to run, not come back." "Exactly." Fletcher helped her climb the muddy bank, his boots slipping on the wet earth. "Weiss is smart, but he's also arrogant. He thinks we're desperate prey running blindly. He won't expect us to circle back and hit his camp." They reached the brush line just as the first dog appeared around the bend in the creek. The animal immediately caught their scent and began baying with renewed excitement. More dogs joined the chorus, and Fletcher could hear men shouting orders in response. "There," Tabitha pointed to a game trail that led up the hillside. That path connects to the old mining road. If we can reach it without being seen, we can get above Weiss's camp. They began climbing, using rocks and tree roots for handholds. The trail was steep and treacherous, especially with wet clothes and boots caked with mud. Behind them, the dogs had reached the spot where they'd left the creek, and the barking intensified. "Fletcher," Tabitha said as they climbed, "there's something else about those letters. Something I didn't tell you." He paused, looking back at her. In the growing darkness, he could barely make out her expression, but her voice carried a weight that made his stomach clench. Marcus wasn't just documenting Weiss's weapon sales. He'd discovered something bigger. Weiss isn't working alone. He's part of a network. Those weapons aren't just going to Indian tribes. They're being funneled to groups planning to overthrow territorial governments. Fletcher felt a chill that had nothing to do with their wet clothes. If Tabitha was right, they weren't just dealing with a murderous arms dealer. They were facing something that could tear apart the entire frontier. Below them, torchlight flickered through the trees as Weiss's men began their systematic search. The old mining road gave them the high ground they needed, but it also exposed them to anyone watching from below. Fletcher and Tabitha moved carefully along the rocky path, using scrub brush and boulders for cover as they made their way toward Weiss's camp. From their vantage point, they could see the orange glow of a campfire in the valley below. Weiss had made camp in the ruins of an old way station, using the partial walls for windbreak and defense. Fletcher counted at least 4 horses picketed nearby, which meant some of his men were still out searching. "There," Tabitha whispered, pointing to a figure sitting close to the fire. "That's Weiss. He's got something in his hands." Fletcher squinted through the darkness. The man was reading by firelight, occasionally holding papers up to catch more illumination. The letters. He was going through Marcus's evidence right there in the open. "Arrogant bastard thinks he's already won," Fletcher muttered. They worked their way down the hillside, moving from shadow to shadow. The approach was treacherous. Loose rocks threatened to betray their position with every step, and they had to freeze whenever one of the remaining men moved around the camp. As they got closer, Fletcher could make out more details. Weiss had spread the letters across a flat rock like he was studying a map. 2 men sat nearby, cleaning their rifles and discussing the search in low voices. A third stood watch at the edge of the firelight, but his attention was focused outward, toward the creek where they expected their quarry to emerge. "The watch is facing the wrong direction," Fletcher observed. "If we can get to those rocks behind the camp, we might be able to create a distraction." Tabitha nodded, then grabbed his arm. "Fletcher, once we do this, there's no going back. Weiss will hunt us to the ends of the earth. He's already doing that." Fletcher checked his revolver, making sure all 6 chambers were loaded. "At least this way, we die fighting instead of running." They separated, Fletcher circling left while Tabitha moved right. The plan was simple. She would create noise and movement on one side of the camp, drawing the guards' attention, while Fletcher grabbed the letters and anything else that might serve as evidence. Fletcher reached position behind a pile of rubble that had once been part of the way station's wall. From here, he was maybe 20 feet from where Weiss sat reading, close enough to see the older man's scarred hands turning pages, close enough to hear him chuckling at whatever Marcus had written about his illegal activities. A stone clattered down the hillside on the far side of camp, Tabitha's signal. The watchman immediately turned toward the sound, rifle raised. The 2 men by the fire grabbed their weapons and moved to investigate, but Weiss remained seated. The letters still spread before him. Fletcher broke cover and sprinted toward the fire. Weiss looked up just as Fletcher dove across the flat rock, scattering papers in all directions. The older man was faster than his age suggested. His hand found the pistol at his belt before Fletcher could grab all the letters. "Heinrich Weiss," Fletcher panted, stuffing papers inside his shirt. "You murdered my uncle." Weiss smiled, his gun now pointed at Fletcher's chest. Marcus Knox was a meddling fool who didn't understand the changing times. Just like his nephew, apparently. A gunshot rang out from across the camp. Tabitha was in trouble. Fletcher could hear men shouting, boots running. But Weiss remained focused on him, the pistol steady in his scarred grip. "Those letters won't do you any good," Weiss said conversationally. "Even if you somehow escape, who will you give them to? I own everyone who matters in this territory." Fletcher had managed to gather most of the papers, but several remained scattered around the rock. As he reached for another one, Weiss cocked his pistol. "I think that's enough, Mr. Knox. Time to join your uncle." The gunshot was deafeningly loud in the confined space of the ruined way station, but it wasn't Weiss who fired. Tabitha stood at the edge of the firelight, her smoking revolver trained on Heinrich Weiss's motionless form. The arms dealer lay sprawled across the flat rock where he'd been reading Marcus's letters, his blood slowly spreading across the evidence that would have condemned him. The others? Fletcher asked, gathering the remaining papers. Dead or scattered? Tabitha's voice was steady, but Fletcher could see her hands trembling slightly. Johnson tried to grab me from behind. Martinez ran when he saw what happened to his boss. Fletcher stuffed the last of the letters inside his shirt and moved to check Weiss's body. The man was definitely dead. Tabitha's shot had taken him center mass, probably piercing his heart. Around his neck hung a silver chain with a medallion Fletcher didn't recognize. Some kind of European design with symbols that meant nothing to him. We need to search him, Fletcher said. If he was part of a larger network like you said, there might be other evidence. They worked quickly, conscious that Martinez or other survivors might return with reinforcements. Weiss carried a leather portfolio containing maps of weapon caches, lists of contacts in territorial governments, and correspondence with someone identified only as Der General, apparently the head of the conspiracy Tabitha had mentioned. This is bigger than we thought, Fletcher said, reading over one of the letters. They're planning to destabilize 3 territories simultaneously, then move in with their own puppet governments. Was planning, Tabitha corrected, holstering her revolver. Hard to run a conspiracy when you're dead. They gathered everything of value, weapons, horses, and most importantly, the complete collection of evidence that Marcus Knox had died trying to protect. As they prepared to leave the ruined way station, Fletcher made a decision that surprised even him. We're not running to Denver, he announced. We're going back to town. Tabitha stared at him. Are you insane? Weiss said he owned everyone who mattered. He said he owned everyone who mattered in the territory. But federal law supersedes territorial authority. Fletcher swung into the saddle of Weiss's own horse, a fine black stallion that seemed fitting justice. There's a telegraph office in town. We send everything we've found to Marshal Carson, along with our location. Let him come to us. 3 weeks later, Fletcher stood on the front porch of the rebuilt ranch house, watching Tabitha hang laundry on the line they'd strung between 2 cottonwood trees. Marshal Carson had arrived with a full company of federal agents, arrested the surviving members of Weiss's network, and officially cleared both Fletcher and Tabitha of any wrongdoing. The conspiracy had unraveled quickly once the evidence became public. Der General turned out to be a former Prussian military officer named Klaus Richter, who was already wanted by federal authorities for similar schemes in other territories. With Weiss dead and their plans exposed, the network collapsed entirely. Tabitha looked up from the laundry and caught Fletcher watching her. She smiled, the first completely unguarded expression he'd seen from her since that desperate day in the kitchen. No regrets? She asked, walking toward him. Fletcher thought about his uncle, about justice served and conspiracies stopped, about the woman who'd started as a desperate stranger, offering herself for protection, and had become his partner in every sense that mattered. None, he said, taking her hand. None at all. If you enjoyed this story, click the video on your screen now to watch another unforgettable tale where courage and destiny collide in the untamed frontier. Don't forget to subscribe and consider a super chat to help us keep bringing you more stories like these. Your support means everything to us.